um, after the recording in progress message starts. Well, hey everybody, thanks for joining us this afternoon or morning, depending on where you are. I am Chris Branham. I'm a news writer with OSU Extension Communications here at Oregon State University. And I'm happy that you all joined us for this webinar today, in which we're going to feature members of the media who are going to talk about effective PR strategies. First, I want to thank our panelists for donating their time today to come and share their knowledge in the short time they'll be with us today. I also want to thank Heather, who will be doing some of the technical stuff with this, who already has been doing it with this webinar, helping put on the webinar and helping announce the webinar. I also want to thank the members of the media relations and learning community leadership team, of which I sit on, Lisa Vold and Stacy Stearns. They were a lot of help in terms of helping plan and put on this webinar. So I'm going to go ahead. How I'm going to do this. I'm going to do an introduction of the panelists, and then each of them are going to take about 5 to 7 minutes, and they're going to talk about what they do, and they're going to address some of the topics that were listed in the webinar description. And then I'm also going to monitor the chat for questions, but we're hoping to save all the questions for after all the panelists are done. So it won't be one of those things where we're going to stop them and answer a question at the time. So feel free to put questions in the chat, but we're going to wait until the end unless it absolutely needs to be done. So here are our panelists. So George Plavin, George, if you want to wave to everybody. George Plavin is a reporter at Capitol Press, a weekly ag newspaper that covers farming, ranching, and ag industries in the Pacific Northwest. Prior to that, George was a reporter at the East Oregonian in Pendleton, Oregon. Holly Spangler is an award-winning writer and photographer. She's the senior editor of Prairie Farmer, Farm Progress publication. She's a member and past president of the American Agricultural Editors Association. Vaughn Kettleson, hi Vaughn, oversees daily agribusiness program as the Farm Services Director for Carroll Broadcasting in Carroll, Iowa. He's also a longtime freelance writer. And before, George, you go ahead, I also want to remind everybody, please mute yourselves. Please make sure you're muted. If we start hearing some noise in the background, we're going to mute you. So, except for our panelists. So, anyway. So, George, you have the floor and take it away.
Well, terrific. Thank you again for having me. I don't really have a presentation or anything prepared, but I do have a couple of notes jotted down of some things that I think would be important to cover. And I figure where I'll start is with the question of what makes an effective release or an effective news pitch. And when I thought about that, the first thing that came to my mind was to really know what the publication's audience is. Myself as a reporter, that's the first thing I will tune out if I get a pitch that's not tailored to my audience, our readers at the Capitol Press, which are primarily farmers and ranchers in the 3 Northwest states. So if I get, a pitch from, something that may be pertinent to the Midwest, agriculture in the Midwest, or something in the Northwest that's not pertinent to agriculture, I'll pretty much tune that out right away. So I would say before you send those releases, just know who you're sending it to and make sure that the news that you're hoping gets covered has some kind of impact to those readers or viewers. I would also say to make sure that it's timely, things that are timely right now, obviously inflation, other national issues that could be focused to a local audience or to a local niche subject like agriculture with us at the Capitol Press. And make sure that those local impacts are communicated clearly and immediately up high in the release or the pitch. That just makes it a lot easier and a lot more eye-catching for me to pick up and to be able to run with that. Other things that are helpful in news releases and pitches are if information is offered, if contact information, I should say, is offered up front to source experts. Phone numbers are always better than emails. For me personally, I like to call people. I don't like to get into long email exchanges. I would much rather just call and leave somebody a voicemail. And also links to additional background materials. So if there's a study or a paper that goes along with whatever the pitch is, make sure that there's access to that, because that's always helpful to kind of do a little bit of digging on background before reaching out to those experts, kind of know better what questions to ask and not just jump in completely cold. And so, yeah, that's really kind of the biggest thing for me, is I just want to make sure that any news I pick up really has an impact for our readers at the paper. It all kind of comes back to them. The time that I spend, I want to make sure that it's in service of the folks who are reading and consuming our news. In terms of communication outlets or strategies, really, any outlet is fine with me, whether it's phone or whether it's email or whether it's text. I've been doing a lot more work on my cell phone since COVID has come in the past 2 years, and there's been a lot more remote work. I try to make sure that my sources have my cell phone number. They can just call that directly or text. I do both. That way, if there's something urgent, you can reach me pretty quickly. And I think the other big thing that we were hoping to address here was how do you build trustworthy relationships? And so I thought about that as well. And I think the biggest thing that stuck out to me was to make sure there's consistent communication, both when there's good news to share as well as when there's something challenging to share. Nothing drives me nuts more than somebody in PR who, let's say, I'm just going to throw out an example here. Let's say there's a project that's under development, and I get, dozens of emails about, hey, we landed a contractor. This is moving forward. We're hitting some of these milestones here. But if there's a setback, all of a sudden, I can't find you. I can't contact you. Just make sure that you don't ghost me, I guess, is the best way to put that. That way, I think then, we build up a little bit of a better rapport, and we work a little bit better together when there are some of those things that you want to be proactive about pitching as well. I don't really have a whole lot more written down beyond that. I am looking forward to the Q&A if folks have specific questions that they want to ask. But that's kind of what I had. I don't know that I've hit my 5 minutes, Chris, but
that sounds great, George. Like I said, we can definitely, if there are things that people thought of or you thought of that we can address in the Q&A, we can go ahead and hit those then.
Terrific.
Thanks, appreciate it. Hopefully, I haven't done any of the things you've talked about. The don'ts.
You've been great about Chris.
All right. Well, Holly, you want to go ahead and tell us about yourself and talk about what George was talking about?
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I echo many things that George said. It's kind of the common sense stuff, that we think about in our business, but it seems that way to us because we do it every day, right? So it's nice to be able to have this conversation today. As I think through the biggest things that get me to open an email or respond to a news release or whatever, number one is a relationship, with that person sending it, and different organizations do that in different ways. But gosh, I think of agriculture as being a very relationship-driven business on virtually any level: ag communications, ag sales, ag everything. We enjoy each other, and the relationships we have. And so, if I get maybe it's a press release even from an organization that I got already, And then it's maybe forwarded to me again by their media relations person or whoever and say, hey, did you see this? I just was thinking that would be really helpful for your audience. That would probably make me more likely, if I did miss it, to open it up again and take a look. The other thing I would say, and I tell this to every writer on our staff and to myself very frequently, is that anytime we're writing something, we need to assume that our readers have something better to do than read what we're writing, because they are from our readers, our audience, they have a lot of things in front of them at any given time, a lot of responsibilities, a lot pulls on their time, as opposed to picking up, their farm magazine or their, phone where they get our e-newsletter or whatever. Like, they've got a lot of other things to do, different things in the mail, different emails to deal with, people to deal with, all kinds of stuff. So assume that they have something better to do than read our story. And so therefore every word that we put together needs to be intentional and directed towards making the best use of their time, so they don't waste their time with this. And I would say the same thing to anyone that's putting out press releases. Assume that we, have something else to read, right? Or something else to click on or open or follow or report on or whatever. And so what you send to us needs to be really an efficient, right, use of words and time, and directed right to who we are, which goes to what George said, about knowing our audience. That's, just part of another thing we talk about a lot is know our readers, know your readers, know your audience, which for you guys means knowing who our audience is and what matters to them. I think the timeliness part is important too. The other thing that's tricky in our business, we're putting out daily news, but we're also putting out a monthly publication in print. So the daily news comes online, the print publication comes out once a month. The daily news is not a huge lead time, obviously, right? And especially even for breaking news, you can pretty well do it that day, but print takes a lot longer. And I think, and I see, if ever I get a release that I'm like, ugh, it's usually because the timeliness is not right? Like, this is April 7th, and I'm still getting the occasional release about planting tips, right? Well, I just sent my April issue off to the printer. So that ship has sailed. It's too late, for us to think about covering that at this point, because our farmers are going to be in the field rapidly. So just to think about some of that, and I know some stories are have plenty of legs online, but if this is something you think you'd like to see in print, like, it's going to take some lead time. And so that means at least a month probably in advance if we're going to get that story chased down and get that into print. Let's see. The other thing I was thinking of too is just the sheer volume of email we all get. And I think emails are great. I, enjoy having a release in an email that I can go back to, or I can save, or I can put into a folder and refer to, and all those kind of things. But golly, I just did a quick check here before we hopped on at 1 o'clock, and I've gotten 23 news releases already today, and it's only 1 o'clock, right? There's going to be more this afternoon. Is what I know. And that doesn't count like all the e-newsletters, right, that I subscribe to, the Washington Post and the Chicago Tribunes and all the ones from our publications, and just a lot of stuff to wade through. So just consider that, as you're sending things. And I think I occasionally will get a bunch of news releases dumped on a weekend. Sometimes from one organization, they'll send a whole bunch over the weekend. And I'm confused by that always, because you come in Monday morning and then you've got all this stuff to sift through. Reader emails and whatever from the weekend, but then there's also all these press releases, and I just don't feel like that probably gets the most attention, at least in my world. And I don't know about everyone else, but think about sending those during working hours, following up, with a relationship driven kind of response, and thinking about, what our readers need and when we need it. And just to, I would add to, like, to know, like, we want to cover so many things, and I'm sure George and Vaughn will say the same thing. Like, we want to cover so many things, but there's so many hours in the day, right? And a really well-written news release helps us a lot. So we appreciate that. I think that's about what I had. I think in terms of, we'll maybe get into more of the trustworthy relationships and that kind of stuff, maybe in the questions, but like I said at the beginning, it really comes down to a lot of relationship building, I think, over time, and the releases I'm more likely to pick up and use come from somebody I know and trust. With that, that's all I have, I think, for my 5 to 7.
Thanks, Holly. I think you hit it exactly. So thank you. We appreciate it. All right. And now Vaughn, with a little bit of hopefully a different perspective of being in the radio background, you can share your experiences and what guidance you have for this group. Oh, and you need to unmute yourself on.
Some listeners would probably say I never sounded so good with having the mute on. I don't know. Just a joke there, but all seriousness, a bit about myself, a bachelor's degree from Iowa State, journalism and speech. And my first job out of Iowa State was actually doing ag PR. I was with a group called Communicating for Agriculture in Minnesota, where I produced a short radio feature for them and did a lot of media tours for their president and vice president, a lot of PR things. So I've already kind of had my share of outreach, although back then, this is in the days before, well, really, faxes just came along. I remember the day we got the fax machine in the office and being amazed by that. Email is good. Was mentioned about that. I go through the same thing that you guys do too. I get 25 plus emails a day, and my job is to sift through them and try to eliminate stuff I can't use off the bat. We have a lot of pieces of information coming our way. What do I look for? Already been mentioned, relevant material. I like to know that the people who are pitching me the stories are trustworthy, honest. If they don't know something, it's okay to say, I don't know the answer to that. I'd rather they do that instead of trying to hem and haw. That goes a long way. George brought up phone calls. I used those a lot in the 80s, and I still would today. Emails are great. I use the social media platforms, Messenger and all that stuff, but there still is nothing like a phone call. That's a good way to connect personally one-on-one. After you pitch the story, I would always follow up when I was doing ag PR. Is there anything else you need from me? What can I do to maybe help you with this story of anything? Any kind of follow-up you need from us? And I give my cell phone number sparingly to ag PR people, but the ones I really believe in and trust, they get my cell phone number off the bat because that's the best way to reach me. And I do want to know, I'm always looking for stories. The operation I'm at is the epitome of local radio. I've worked at one before up in Northeast Iowa, KOEL, that was like this. This is even more so. And what takes precedence here, local, more than any place else I've worked at. Certainly more than what would be done at Brand X in Des Moines or a couple of ag radio networks I could name. So I always look for a local angle here. If you have a local producer that's part of your group or using your product, that's even better. That really can go a long way toward getting me to go out and interview them and get your feature on the air. So I think that pretty much covers it. I don't know if there's anything else you need from me, but
No, well, thanks, Vaughn. That's great. I just did put in the chat for folks who have joined us in the last few minutes who missed the beginning. I am, I would say we're about to enter the Q&A section. So if you want to put your question in chat, or if you just want to unmute yourself or share or turn your video on and ask your question. I did have a question to start out for all the presenters. And I'm sorry if I'm stealing somebody's question here, but I'm wondering, and a few of you hit on this, but I'm wondering what probably the biggest disconnect is between PR folks and media in terms of just like, I think George said pet peeves and how, but I'm just wondering if there's something you're thinking about that just, there is just this there's just a disconnect here that's still ongoing even after you work with folks or are trying to work with folks. Is there anything that comes to mind that we just still aren't doing right? Or maybe I should say right, but basically that aren't doing to benefit the relationship or the coverage. And that's for the panelists.
Okay. I've always had good luck with PR people because a lot of them have a news background and vice versa. So really, as long as they're sympathetic to knowing about deadlines, timely information, and good sources, it's very rare that I guess a few bad experiences with somebody not following up, but I don't know, the question is differences between both types. They're so intertwined because a lot of us have worked in both sides of that industry, it seems like. Oh, maybe the others have other thoughts on that than I do.
Yeah, I've been sitting here thinking, I can't think of a great one. I don't see so much in the folks that I work with, that have had past journalism experience. A lot of younger people, who have gone straight from, college into PR or wherever they're at. But I've just had strikingly good experiences over time. The only one that I can think of that's kind of my funny story from years ago was a young man with an agency, and they had sent out some press releases, and he called me, as they sometimes do, to follow up and say, hey, did you get our press release? And I said, yes. And he wanted to know, he's like, great, well, are you going to use it? And I said, well, no, I'm not going to. And he was like, well, can I ask why? I said, well, it's because it's about sugar beets, and we don't grow sugar beets in Illinois.
Yeah.
And he says, really? And I'm sitting here looking at the phone going, wow. And then he says, well, where do they grow sugar beets? And I was, surprised, but also like, okay, we're going to have a little educational moment here, and shared where they do grow sugar beets, and shared with him their editors in those states. And that's what we did. But that's sort of the classic example, I think, of somebody not really knowing their audience and not even knowing what they didn't know. And such a rarity, right? So I share that as funny, haha, but it's not the norm, you know what I mean, of the folks that I interact with on things like that. And I sure hope that young man found his spot in the world.
Yeah, I can't think of any specific, necessarily disconnects between reporters and public relations professionals, other than just certain news and certain stories work well for our audience and for our publication, and sometimes they don't. It could be a perfectly crafted press release, and it just, for whatever reason, the news just doesn't quite fit with what we're looking to cover at that time, or with what we feel needs to be in that week's edition of the paper. Other than that, the only other thing I can really think of is I would just stress that myself as a reporter, I like to use press releases as a tool, but I don't like to lean on them exclusively. I'm not going to run a press release verbatim. I am going to want to do my own research and my own interviews for a story. And that's where it comes back with, if you can provide additional background materials and direct connections to subject experts, that's going to go a long way toward me picking up a story.
Thanks, George. Victor has his hand up, but we do have two questions in the chat before you raise your hand, Victor. So I'm going to get those two questions, and then I'll get to you. So the question from Ann Robinson: are there days of the week? This is a good one, I think. Are there days of the week? They're all good questions, but I like this one. Are there days of the week that are best to send news releases for your outlets?
I could start with that. For the Capital Press and for really any weekly newspaper, It's good to know what the publication day is. In our case, we need to have our news turned in for the print publication by the end of the day on Tuesday. I'm sure that's different for any weekly that you'll work with. So if it's something that is really time sensitive, be sure that you're aware of that and you don't inadvertently send something at the very last minute and we can't get it in that particular week. I think you'll also find though that at the same time, we consider ourselves a weekly in terms of print, but a daily in terms of our online presence. So we can turn around stories quickly for the web. And really, I don't know of anybody else who's more guilty of this than government organizations, but I always cringe at the dreaded 4:45 p.m. Friday news dump. That drives me insane. Because right now, my publication does not have the budget for me to work overtime on the weekends. So I cannot get back to that until at least 2 or 3 days have passed. And again, maybe it's not timely at that point anymore. So I would keep that in mind as well.
I would share something that the University of Illinois College of Aces does that I think is really smart. I don't know that there's a rhyme or reason to what day they send out press releases. And I can't even say that I think there's a great day over another, because we all like George said, their deadline day is Tuesday. Well, ours is Thursday for the next week. So I was starting to say, well, maybe Monday or Tuesday, but it's just different for everybody. But U of I started several years ago sending out kind of like a Friday recap email, and I forget what they call it. But they basically, it's just a Friday afternoon. I think it maybe comes early afternoon that links to and has, a quick hit from each of the releases they've sent out that week, which I love because then if I've missed one, it's my second chance, right? Or sometimes I'll go through that, and it's and think, okay, oh, that's right, I wanted to follow up on that one, but that was a busy day, but now I've got it in front of me again. But I just think that's been really useful in my work.
My needs are a little bit different being in radio with deadlines. I actually, by design, pretty much know what I'm going to do the coming week ahead. I have every Monday, ISU Extension climatologist Dr. Elwin Taylor on with me for a lengthy visit about, of course, weather. So that takes care of Monday. Pretty good idea of what I'm going to do on Tuesday. Wednesday, I have a market analyst on. So I don't have to scramble with deadlines as much, surprisingly, but I guess just whenever somebody can get me the information and it's timely, that always helps.
Great. So Vaughn, this question is specifically for you from Tracy Courage. Any tips for getting public service announcements on the air?
Yeah, well, simply approach the station. If I get any, I pass them on to our operations manager or the general manager. And usually they'll comply, at least at our level here, being a very local operation. Chances are pretty good you can get it on if it's got some relevance to it locally to our listeners in the area. That really helps. But, just make the effort, approach, and show why it's a good thing. And I'd probably approach the operations manager or program director. If it's a farm type thing, then the farm broadcaster, I guess. Yeah.
Thanks, Vaughn. That's a great tip. Sometimes I'm confused by people's titles. I'm not exactly sure if I'm reaching the right person. So I'm
not exactly sure about that either sometimes, actually.
All right, we've got a couple more questions in the chat, but Victor had his hand raised before those came in. So Victor, if you want to go ahead and ask your question.
Thanks, Chris, and thank you for the panelists. I was curious if any of you proactively use social media to look for stories, and if so, what do you look for and what do you like to see?
I use social media like Twitter, particularly during the growing season, to kind of follow what's going along, ag Twitter, the farmers that are on there, to kind of see, well, where's it raining, where's it not, who's planting, who's not, who's harvesting, how's it going, what weeds are showing up, what insects are showing up, that kind of stuff. I'm trying to think if I can think of an example of, time I've come across. I mean, there are certainly a lot of stories and news things that are shared across social media with varying degrees of success. But that's primarily how I would use it, for my stories is kind of seeing how the growing season's coming.
Yeah, a short answer for me is yes. I do use social media to look for stories. All platforms: Facebook, Twitter, to a lesser extent Instagram. I don't think people really use that Instagram for that purpose. I think it's mostly Twitter. And I kind of find that the things that really gain traction on social media and are shared a lot are stories about innovation or something unique and different that might be happening in a particular industry, whether it's a new piece of technology or a new practice, or some kind of adaptation to a weather event or climate change. And so I think those catch other people's eyes, and the more they get shared around, I guess the more they maybe get bumped up in the algorithm and could wind up on my timeline. So I think that's probably most of what I see when I'm perusing social media.
Vaughn, you're nodding your head.
It's a good question, and I'm on all those social platforms. I have used Twitter. In fact, once the producer pointed out a story that was going on in Indiana. I won't bore everybody with the details, but livestock producer being hassled by the city council for not having shelter for his outdoor cattle. And I did an interview with the guy, and it was through Twitter. I found him, and I got a lot of interest from other broadcasters across the Midwest through Twitter. On my end, I use social media more for promotion about what I'm doing, what the stations are doing almost daily. I had a listener stop in here yesterday. I posted his picture by our call letters, the events I go to. So it's more for promotion with me, but they're all great sources for stories. We're very much in this area, an older demo in Western Iowa. So people are tuned to Facebook, but Twitter is a good source, and I'm on with the Iowa Department of Ag and others. And it's a big part of my world, and I welcome social media. I'm not afraid of it. I've grown to really like it, and it helps me in what I do.
Just a little quick follow-up question there. Do you also read the app mentions if you're app mentioned on some post?
Yeah, I do. If you're asking me, yeah, if somebody likes something, for example, on Facebook or as a comment, I read those. Yeah, I need to pay more attention to the other platforms. I post on them, and I need to do, admittedly, a better job of following those. But I am interested in feedback from listeners, or in this case, viewers of the platform. So yeah, I take them seriously.
Holly or George?
I would just echo what Vaughn just said. Yes, I do. And in fact, that's probably the most direct way to get my attention on something on social media is to tag me on it.
Yeah, and I would say too, like, if we've, when we do a story with you or with your folks, to share it and tag us. Like our goal in this whole deal is to get people to read our stuff, right? So anything you can do to help us, or listen to it. I'm sorry, Vaughn. Anything you can do to help us get that further, and share it and tag us, and that's fantastic.
Yeah, one thing that I do, and I'm sure that a lot of the folks in this meeting do, is if I do share a story that was either generated through a tip or a release to the person, or it's just of interest, I always make sure to tag the person and try to give them credit in the if there's space available in the tweet, to give them credit for their story. So it's just not like appearing out of nowhere. It's like, here's a great story, and want to make sure that the person gets credit. So Brad had a comment and a question that I actually had when George was talking about his pet peeve about only emails being provided. He says, love the tips. George mentioned listing researchers' phone numbers. That's not our practice. It's probably a lot of you all folks, and that's input from our faculty members who don't like having their numbers shared. They want their emails shared. We as PR pros connect researchers with media. Are there any thoughts on how we can sort of navigate that with faculty who would prefer to get first contact through email?
Yeah, and I certainly respect that. That's how a number of organizations prefer to do that, is for basically those interactions to go through and be organized by public relations. I would say that certainly that works. Make sure that timelines are being clearly communicated. Again, it's kind of a situation where if I'm needing to get a story turned around and I, maybe give you or we connect early in the day, and then it just kind of turns into a, well, let me circle back around to you, and then I don't hear back for quite a long time, or don't really know when that's going to get set up, then that can create some challenges. So just make sure that you're keeping in regular contact and can communicate when that interview can be arranged. That's always helpful for me. It just helps me to keep my schedule in line.
Holly or Vaughn, I see Vaughn's nodding again. Holly, do you want to share about
Yeah.
the use of, again, we're talking about how most faculty like their emails being shared, not their phone numbers, but you all are talking about you like phone numbers rather than emails.
Yeah, I'm probably a little old school enough that I really enjoy just being able to contact somebody, and have that number or email. I really don't care. But I also understand, and I've seen the value of a good PR person, especially at a university or extension level, who can arrange those interviews, and maybe especially with researchers who, well, I mean, everybody's got busy schedules, and but when they can shoot me back an email and say, hey, I've touched base with them, they're available, these days or whatever, and we figure that out. I think it's also especially helpful if that researcher is maybe, maybe somebody new to ag, right? Like maybe they're actually in another college, but they're doing some water project or, something like that. And so they don't necessarily know who, Prairie Farmer is or who I am or anything else. And I don't know them. And so it's kind of nice to have at least somebody kind of be a conduit there. And I would add too, especially if maybe English isn't their first language, it's really helpful to have, those folks kind of be a go-between and just kind of help get everything set up. And it just makes for, I've found that it makes for a more fruitful conversation when we do get together.
Vaughn, did you have something to add to that? Because the next question is for you as well. Oh, you're muted again.
Kind of a short tip for especially those that may be watching this that are new to PR. Be careful about giving cell phones out of colleagues. Get their permission. I had that happen to me once. Another radio station, the guy had a talk show, and I gave out a cell phone number, and I said, "Hey, Mike, I hope you didn't mind." He said, "Well, I do. I'd rather you not do that." So, I'm really cognizant of that, and that's a sensitive topic because I once actually kind of had a stalker who would call me a lot with a lot of crazy calls. So I'm very open about my cell phone, but with the right people. And if I trust you, that means you get my cell phone number. And but be careful about sharing it. It's my tip for those watching this that are getting into ag PR. Get permission first.
That's a great tip, Vaughn. We don't have somebody from TV on this panel, but just for the folks who've worked with TV folks, and I'm sure that our panelists are aware, cell phone numbers are where they're at. I mean, and just to amplify what George mentioned, it's a TV person will not ask for a person's email address. They're going to ask for their cell phone, because they want to schedule the interview, and probably Vaughn for you as well. They want to do it as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
And so, just yesterday we received an email from a TV station that said, have a deadline by 2. Is there somebody I can talk to? Sending an email to a faculty member and then sending an email to that person is not going to help that much. You really need to get at least their office number if they're in the office. I know that COVID's changed a lot of things where a lot of people are using their personal numbers and their cell phone numbers. So got a few more questions to get to, so I want to make sure we get to them. And so Vaughn, this question is for you as well. How do you recommend working with, how we work with faculty who have fairly strong accents for radio? That sort of follows up a little bit of what Holly was mentioning of faculty who are, who have strong expertise, but maybe English isn't their first language, or they have a strong accent.
Yeah, I've kind of encountered that before. I just try to make them feel relaxed and encourage them to take their time. And I tell them, you know, I can edit if you need to pause and think about something. I don't come out and say, you need to think about how to pronounce that word, but I just say, if you need to think about something, pause and I can take it out, being it's radio. I've been pretty fortunate. Most of the ones I've worked with, I had a gentleman from India, but his accent wasn't so thick that you couldn't understand him. If it's really bad, that requires a lot of diplomacy. And if you have to find somebody else, that requires a good deal of tact, but it's just something to work with and encourage them to relax. And maybe that will help them be more focused in on not thinking about the accent and being able to communicate better. It can be a tough one though, I'm sure, in other circumstances.
Yeah, that's good. That's good to know. I would just also say for our folks, I tend to I have evolved over this. I tend to now give people the benefit of the doubt. I'm more likely to basically, if it's for broadcast, I'm more likely to as opposed to try to protect them or shield them from that. Because we have some faculty who have fairly strong accents who have done fine. They've done great. And I think that, you know, but also that's one other little tip I would say for PR folks is know who the folks you are. Like if you haven't ever talked to them, regardless of their language, you know, if you have never talked to this person, you want to make sure that they are fairly well versed in media and dealing with media, and B, can be articulate, and they're not going to not be prepared for a media interview. So media training is a whole other topic for a whole other workshop. Okay, John Hawley from Montana State Extension. He has a question. Considering the large number of press releases and news sent your way that you guys have talked about, how have extension systems and similar public organizations consistently gained your attention with our communication?
I would refer back to that, you know, what I mentioned earlier about the weekly news roundup, you know, that Illinois does on Friday. I think that's a great way to consistently gain attention. You know, the other thing I can think of, and again, this is an example from U of I, because that's our land grant that I work with here, but they, you know, they will occasionally reach out ahead of time and say, hey, we've got this release coming out next week. Would you like an early interview with them? And that's really nice. I'm not always able to, you know what I mean? Like it may just fall so close that it doesn't, I can't, you know, get around the deadline or my deadline to get it done, but I really appreciate it. I appreciate that they're thinking of us that way. And again, that goes to building the relationship and the trust between both of us.
Anything the other folks want to add about how extension captures your attention?
I would come back to what I said earlier, just about timeliness. I've gotten some emails in the past where, and again, I'll just throw out inflation as the example, but you know, it will say, you know, something to the effect of, hey, you know, your audience is obviously having to deal with this. They're thinking about it now. Kind of here's the news hook. We have experts on this subject who can speak directly to those impacts and maybe ways to mitigate them or you know, future forecasts and trends. But just kind of capitalizing on, you know, something that is clearly making the waves and is timely, and then bringing that back to our local readership. That certainly captures my attention quite a bit, and I think stands out among the dozens and dozens of pitches that I'll get.
Great, thanks. I don't see any other questions in the chat. Is there anybody who wants to add a question or raise their hand or turn on their mic and ask a question. I did have another question for the panelists, but Lisa Vold has chimed in onto the chat perfectly, at perfect timing. When you talk about building relationships, as people change jobs or students graduate, how do they need to approach you to start to or maintain a relationship, especially if news isn't always a consistent stream for an organization? So how do they maintain that relationship if they're moving around or changing roles?
I oftentimes do the old-fashioned thing. I'm going to reach into my drawer and send them a note card. Congratulations on your new gig. Send them my business card. I hope we can stay in touch. If there's anything I can do for you, please get in touch with me.
I thought you were going to pull out your stack of business cards that
That's a separate drawer.
Actually, that's a quick question for all. Do you all still hand out your business cards to folks?
All the time.
Yes.
Yeah,
Anybody else?
I think in terms of that turnover question, I think we see that so much. And I know maybe not necessarily an extension in universities, but gosh, in the agency business, when a company moves from one agency to another, a lot of times some of those people are switching agencies. So then you kind of have to retrack your brain to, okay, now that person is now with this agency, but still with that company. There's just I think it's just a remarkably small world, and of all those folks, doing that same kind of work. I think we're kind of used to it. I don't know that that's terribly difficult, but I think a note, kind of like what Vaughn's saying from those folks, like, hey, to somebody in the news business that they've had a relationship with, to say, hey, I'm actually changing to do this thing now. I've gotten a couple of those. I've even, just even as an email, the handwritten note's fantastic. I got an email, this winter that I was glad to see, right? This somebody that's moved on to a different organization, and they were great in the first role and they'll be great in this one. And it just gives us a chance to stay in touch. And because now I've got our email again.
All right, well, Becky has another question. We government employees, for those of us on the call who work for universities, public universities, or work for agencies, we government or employees often feel we shouldn't play favorites with various media outlets and pitch only to our friends. Do you want exclusives? You just mentioned a little bit about that, Holly. That could be a little bit, I think, I've been on both sides of the coin as a newspaper reporter and as a PR person for university. It can be a little bit of a minefield, I think, a slippery slope, if I can just lard on the cliches there. But how do you feel about the idea of you all getting exclusives over maybe your competitors?
I'm almost a little wary if somebody calls me up and says, I want to pitch you an exclusive. For some reason, that makes me think that you're wanting me to report a story a certain way, or you think that I'm going to report a story a certain way. It may not necessarily be that, but that's just where my mind tends to go. I like to think that kind of through the lens of our publication, and because we are niche and we do things a little bit differently from other daily newspapers or TV stations, that we kind of cultivate our own exclusives just by reporting the news through the lens that we report it through. It becomes an exclusive. So I don't expect anybody to say, oh, I'm only going to work with you on this. And actually that almost raises a little bit of a red flag.
I wish I'd saved an email I got years ago, but it was a pitch for an exclusive story. And it was so clearly a form email. Like they even had the brackets, insert, like, dear, insert name, I'd like to offer you an exclusive story on such and such that your bracket publication name could use. And I'm like, I don't think we have the same definition of the word exclusive here. Because clearly this is going to a lot of people.
That's funny.
I don't know. I think I want our stories to be the first, the best, and the deepest analysis of anything, right? So I like the idea of having something that's different or early or whatever. And I guess I'm not as wary about that pitch. I guess if it's somebody that I know, if it's something straight out of the blue, then with a company I've never heard of, or an organization I don't know, or the person I don't know, then little I would have questions about that. But gosh, from our like extension and university partners, like those are people we work with all the time. I wouldn't be worried about that at all. But like I do like the idea of having something first, or a deeper interview with somebody that'll give our story just a more depth or analysis or whatever. But I get you're walking a fine line there, because you got to pass those around. So I understand that too.
Thanks, Vaughn. Do you have any feelings on being pitched exclusives?
I've never really encountered that before. As a former ag PR person, I've never really encountered that either, but if I had, I would simply thank them for their interest in the story. And I tell you what, I can't guarantee an exclusive, because it's my job to make sure the other media outlets in your community have access to our president of the organization talking about the food sales tax or whatever. But I can see to it that you get whatever materials you need, and help to arrange a one-on-one sit down between you and him, whatever time you need. And that's how I'd handle it. But that's never really been a factor either side of the aisle for me.
Yeah, thanks. And I'm going to take a point of personal privilege here, just in terms of my view on this as a reporter and as being now on the PR side. I do admit that there have been times when, if there's a reporter who consistently shows interest in what I send, if they consistently work in a very collegial, professional way, if they have consistently reached out, I will tend to work with occasionally, maybe say, hey, just wanted to let you know I saw this somewhere. I've done that with George. Hey, I saw this on Facebook. one of our faculty members, research group, this pest has showed up at our research station. So I don't know if that's considering playing favorites, but I do feel like if reporters who consistently show interest in what we're doing, I'm going to basically work with them and help and maybe give them something. I shouldn't say give them, but basically send them something, as opposed to somebody who I never hear from, who only wants it to be a very one-way transaction. Give me stuff and I'm not going to do anything for you. Again, there's no TV panelists on here. There's not a TV person, but TV tends to, just the nature of their work is, I think that's probably the toughest in terms of building, in my view, toughest in building relationships, because again, talking about the turnover issue, many of us are in places with very small TV outlets, if they have them at all, and they're going to have reporters who are and editors who are or producers are going to be right out of college, and well, not the producers, but the reporters will be right out of college. And that's again where especially our faculty get frustrated, because they say, oh, we were out there for a whole hour and they used 10 seconds. I used to say I did the same thing. I was a print reporter. I would have a half-hour interview and I'd use one quote, but they don't never seem to notice that. Is there any other questions? We only have a few minutes left. Actually, we're right out almost our time, and I do appreciate all the folks who've come here. And this you're probably all seeing the recording. Oh, Kristen has a question. This is being recorded and will be put on the ACE website. On the flip side of exclusives, how do you feel about media opportunities where several outlets might be invited or present? As I mentioned, TV, I get the impression that at least locally here that you want those exclusives. So how do you feel about media opportunities where several outlets might be invited or present?
Yeah, we attend those all the time. And I'm not TV, so I don't know, about what that experience is like, but gosh, we go to, press conferences and agronomy days and all those kinds of stuff all the time. And we know all our other friends in media are there. And, I might pull somebody aside later and ask questions, that are not in front of everybody, but that's just the way it works. Like, I don't think anybody, thinks less of it that way. That's just the way the gig works.
So I have to issue a correction. I misstated Kristen's the purpose for her question. What she was saying was that TV reporters want those exclusives. We do hear from them occasionally saying, especially that they want to have an exclusive. They don't want to go to an event. They want to have something prior to the event. And I think if Kristen, if I'm totally botching that, feel free to unmute yourself and clarify.
Yeah, I know TV reporters, they work on insane schedules as well, between actually being out and reporting something and then having to be back to edit and produce it in time for the 5 or 6 o'clock news. I'm sure that they're looking to save as much time as they can on any story that they might get. For me personally, I don't really trouble myself too much with what somebody else from another outlet might be doing or asking for. I'm just focused on what I'm doing and trying to do the best that I can with it and making it unique. And again, something that impacts our audience in a way that it might not impact somebody else's audience.
Chris, can I add one last thing that I just thought of? When we're talking about what makes things stand out, one thing I wish I'd hit on earlier is just that idea of for extension or university news bureaus to really have a good science writer in there makes such a huge difference. And we have been really fortunate again, I'm referring to Illinois, but they've always had a good person who's just a talented science writer, right? That they can talk to a researcher and translate what they're saying into a news release that makes sense, and still honors that work and makes that researcher happy, but also, a farmer can sit down and read that and it makes sense to them too. That's a skill and a gift. And we appreciate that deeply when somebody's got that skill and they're in that position. So that's a good one too.
Yeah, thanks for adding that. Ann Robinson, who is a science writer, says thanks from a science writer in the chat.
Yay.
So for those who are going to watch the recording and don't have access to the chat, you can also make that pitch to extension directors who determine our extension communications budgets.
Absolutely.
All right, well, we're right at time. Unless somebody has an absolute need to ask question, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. I appreciate everybody who's come. I'm really happy with the turnout. And one thing I was not able to do in moderating this, there was a request in the chat to provide the links to the panelists, your essentially to your personal link or your news organization, basically a link to maybe potentially how to reach you. I'll try to get that attached to the recording, or I can just we'll figure out some way to do that so people will know more about you all, and so we'll do that. So I apologize I wasn't able to put the links to the folks in the chat. And yes, and thank you so much. Oh, Heather's doing it right now. So for the folks who are, but it's in chat. So we'll oh, Holly did. I'm sorry, not Heather. Holly put her link in there. George just put his link in there. I think if you all can just hang out just for a minute or two more, you can copy and paste those and you'll have that. I don't want to end it until this is because the chat will end. So again, thanks. And for those of you who are in ACE and are looking forward to coming to the conference in Kansas City, we're hoping to maybe do another media panel at the conference. Oh, and George is up the ante. He's put his phone number in the chat. So
Cell phone.
yeah.
That one is not actually my cell. And after hammering on cell phones for an hour, I really ought to put my cell phone in.
I don't know how to enter my information here, Chris. What do I need to do?
That's fine, Vaughn. So you would go in the chat, and if you just have a link to maybe to your LinkedIn or to your
I type that in somewhere here or what? I don't use Zoom an awful lot, so.
That's fine. I'm jealous of you. Let Vaughn get that in there. And if
Well,
anybody has one.
I don't know how to on Zoom here.
That's okay. That's okay. We'll figure out. Like I said, I think I can work with Heather in terms of embedding your. And Vaughn asked what's your radio station, so maybe she can just Google it.
Carroll Broadcasting. Carroll is spelled with 2 R's and 2 L's. CarrollBroadcasting.com. We have 3 radio stations in the mix: KCIM, KIKD, and KKRL. CarrollBroadcasting.com. Or should I just say my email, or what do you want me to do?
No, that's good. That works. That
Okay.
works. So,
Okay.
well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate it, and we'll stop the recording.